space or time or gap which you can feed those to. So, Bill,
Good.
thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. I want to tell you an anecdotal story first to get this started. I was called to do a composting class for the Shalom Center. That's where they have three different Jewish temples there. They wanted the Jewish perspective on composting. Pause, pause, pause. There's no such thing. It is a biochemical process irrespective of race, creed, color, sexual orientation. It don't care who you is. Now, the biochemical process is what we're going to address first. Now, to back up and clarify this, there was one textbook that they had for this particular seminar that I did for them on composting. I was able to check it out, and there it was a reference of rabbis, rabbinical students, and other scholars that chronicled the land stewardship of the faith in Central Europe when they didn't own the land. It was illegal for them to own the land for a period of time. They were successful in creating those individuals that were able to secure land. They were able to take the produce and what was left over and add it back into the soil to bring it up to standards. When you take a crop out, you are taking nutrients out of the crop. If you don't add back, what happens? The same thing that happens if you don't feed children. They don't grow up, right? Now, the beginning of composting is the beginning of the nitrogen cycle. If we didn't have the nitrogen cycle, waste would be up to the stratosphere. The naturally occurring process breaks down nutrient material that's in living tissue. That's either when it's fallen, it dies, it's then chemically converted back into a usable material for subsequent plant growth. Now, I'm going to give you two examples of bacterial action. Let's take a steak. Top, bottom, side. Put it on the grill or wash it first, clean it first. Put it on the grill, boom. There's very little food contamination. But if you have food contamination and you grind that up into hamburger, you have increased the level of negative bacterial activity that can result in food poisoning. Now, that's bad bacterial action. Good bacterial action is the grinding up of organic material, plant waste. That ground up then increases the surface area, which speeds up the decomposition process and gets organic matter, nutrients from the organic matter released back into the soil that the next generation of plants can take up. Now, I've just given you about a paragraph, but the way I break it down is mo finer, the shredder, the better. Because I have increased the surface area by the shredder. If I have big particles or bigger particles, that's not better. The smaller particles, that's better, because there is more surface area for the naturally occurring bacterial action to work its magic and reduce nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, calcium. All the trace elements that you need for plant growth and soil health are then released through the nitrogen cycle. Okay? Now, what are you going to remember? The paragraph of the biochemical discussion that I just had, or mo finer, the shredder, the better? Okay? Now, you can always go back and reference the science behind it, but that's what most people remember. Okay? These?
They're getting the metallics.
Ah!
Going online, and that's the only thing I can look at in the.
How's that? Is that better?
Yeah.
Is that better?
The online people that are hearing it. So give her a minute.
Sure.
Keep going though. Don't
Oh, okay. All right. Now, this is not real material. This is dyed Spanish moss, but I have it so that it visually gives you the impression of the proper ratio mix for greens, which is the nitrogen component, and the browns, which is the leaves, and the ratio is typically 2 parts to 1. And there are a number of texts that reference that, but what this is doing is it gives you the raw materials to start the decomposition process that turns into this, which is finished compost from the city of Charlotte. See that? That's the finished material right there. Yep. Yeah. There you go. Now, is something fall down here?
No.
Oh. Oh, okay. Now, added that back too, and I told Debbie this story earlier today. I was actually at a high school, and one of the teachers was explaining how to amend red clay. And her formula was add sand and add moisture to it. Well, that with heat, which we have in abundance come July here, is the formula that Boron Clay Products has used to make bricks for about 120 years. That is not how you fix the soil, because the soil particles in clay are so small that they compress very easily. They make a great foundation for a building, but not so much for plant material, right? Because the roots have to grow and permeate into a friable material like this, also referred to as fluffy. So if you want fluffy soil in red clay, you have to add back organic material to it to break up that clay bind that any compaction increases. For instance, if I'm running a D8 dozer on a construction site here, Mecklenburg County, anywhere the clay belt is, and I'm trying to save a tree, I've got to keep that dozer way away from that tree, because if it's wet, it's going to compress those roots and compress that soil to where it will have to fight its way to continue to grow. That's where the boundaries have to be set much wider for tree preservation in an urban setting and in a construction site. Irrespective of the various diseases that we deal with here, that is just a physical problem created during construction, because they have reduced by compression of this machinery the friability of the soil. The roots have to fight its way through it. Now, if you want to see time-lapse photography of root growth on, I think it's Nature Channel, the Nature series, public television, the series is called What Plants Talk About. You can see it on YouTube, you can see it on any computer, What Plants Talk About. And there, University of British Columbia in Canada, they have time-lapse photography in a seed bed where you can actually see the roots grow with multiple time-lapse photography. So you can see how the roots behave. There they've got a seed bed very much like this, but the camera is protected by a plexiglass tube, so it can go in there and take multiple photos that you can actually see how the roots behave. That's an excellent visual that because you can't see it in the soil. The soil is dark, all right? You can't get in there. This thing can get in there, you can actually see it. So recommend you watch that. There are all kinds of other bits in that video in terms of the mushroom growth around forests and how it all connected in the forests in British Columbia, but that's no different than what we have here in North Carolina. So it's just one more aspect of the soil itself and how important it is to keep it nutritionally viable and to avoid as much compaction as possible. Now, the ratio is 2 to 1, 2 parts brown to 1 part green. And rather than moving a yard of soil, I figured I'd just make an aquarium. We did this for one of the television stations on how to plant. They set up the camera right here, not in this, but a bigger aquarium, so I could show them how to do 2 by 2 or the 2 and 2 planting technique, where nutrients are put in 2 inches below the bedding plant roots, and 2 inches in the circle around the plant stem. And the camera was set right here. So rather than looking over my shoulder, they could see exactly how to plant without me having to describe it. And that's why I made something like this, so that you can actually, well, let me turn it around. I'll come this way first. Browns and greens. And the browns and greens. And I'll come back this way. There we go. There we go. All right. There we go. And there we go. Now, this begs the question, how do I get the browns in July? Everything's green, right? Most everything is alive. So this question came up for a Montessori school in Charlotte that I did probably 7 or 8 years ago. So what we had the kids do, we built out of concrete reinforcing wire a holding tub where they went out and collected all the leaves that they could get in the Dilworth neighborhood. Because in the fall, we got all the leaves we could possibly need. And what are the leaves? They are the browns when they dry out and fall. All the chlorophyll has been leached out. Basically, it's nothing but carbon left, okay? So they can either be shredded. Remember, mo finer the shredder, the better. The quicker decomposition takes place, the more finely the material is shredded. Do you know what a tub grinder is? It's an industrial piece of equipment that you can basically drop a tree stump into it. Diesel powered, circular, it rotates it and chops it down enough where it can take that massive piece of cellulose and grind it into a usable batch like this, that after further breaking down will create something like this, a product like this, when you add the greens. Now, if I'm an arborist, which I am, if I'm cutting a living tree, if I go out there and prune that tree right now, I've got carbon and I've got nitrogen in that tree. So if I grind it up, I'm going to have a close ratio to this right here off that one branch. I've got the green leaves, I've got the carbon in there. I've also got moisture. We did this at the demo garden in Charlotte a decade ago. We had to clean it out. There was everything in it. And one thing, keep in mind, it's nigh to impossible to do a composting system correctly at a public space like a park, because you get everything in there imaginable. I know this because I found it when I cleaned it out, okay? So what we did was we had all this trimming that we had to do. So we had leaves, we had stems, we had overgrown vegetation. So we had this, a 3-bin system. Just imagine it isn't here, nothing in it. So everything that we had went in here because we had the browns and we had the greens. Within 10 days, I could put my hand over this bin. We'll say we're looking down. I could put my hand here and feel the heat coming off of it. So it was an exothermic reaction where the naturally occurring bacteria was starting to break it down and giving off heat, because there was everything we needed: moisture, nitrogen, carbon, all in this one bin. Now, what do I do next? What am I doing? Oxygenating it. It's got to have oxygen. If it does not, it becomes an anaerobic situation if there's too much moisture there, and it starts to stink. If I took yard clippings, filled an entire bin with that, it would stink to high heaven. Okay? But if I'm mixing in dry materials, and if I've got a finely ground material, then I would have a more controlled environment and a more controlled process to create this right here. But that's what it takes. If I had no oxygen, that would be a stinking mess. So that's part of the how-to. Now, several war stories. That's one. Another one, we've got 27 community gardens on park and recreation property in Mecklenburg County. Composting is discouraged because one of the larger gardens, they use the same composting technique that my grandfather used, my late grandfather used to use. And that was, go throw that over there, boy. Everything was cut now. It was decomposing. It would decompose, but it took a while because he didn't mow finer, mow shredder. It wasn't the better. So those are the things that are part of this process for you to successfully do this. Now that was one. The garden at Rocky River, that's one of the largest community gardens in Mecklenburg County. There they grew sunflowers. They didn't grow the dwarf sunflowers. They grew giant sunflowers. The sunflowers are great. They're lovely. You know, they inspire all kinds of beauty, right? The seeds are edible. But what they create is a stalk about like that. And when you throw that, as my grandfather did, over there in the corner, and you keep throwing it over there in the corner, keep throwing it over there in the corner, in about 5 years, you have a stack of them that are about 10 feet tall. Now, these community gardens are tight. So the only way to fix that would be to get in a mini skid steer, a mini bobcat, or dingo or something like that, which we didn't have access to. So it just stayed there until volunteers came and hauled it out. That's where improper composting, improper procedures created a mess. Now, can you compost it? Of course you can. But what do? Take out a pair of clippers, put it on a board, chop, 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 increase the surface area to mow finer. You increase the surface area so they will break down that much faster. Any questions? Okay. Now, this is another finished product. This is seed starter mix, and it's even finer. That is the finest grind, okay? Okay. Here. And this you can get at any of the big box stores. Well, this came from Lowe's. And this is moist. The moisture is already in it. There you go. You see, there are no big particles in there at all. Okay.
That's seed starter mix?
Yes. Yeah. Now, Metrolina Greenhouses, largest greenhouse complex in North and South America, 200 acres under glass in northern Mecklenburg County. They are a principal beneficiary of the programs that I've run at the jail, second jail, Jail North, for a decade. They supply me all of the potting mix that I need. And there they have an on-site grinding facility that they take in stumpage, timber, they have peat moss brought in, and there they grind everything and make their own mix. So when I run out, I give them a call, and then I get bags, enough bags to fill up the bed of my truck. And then that goes to the Green Jailhouse, Green Jail North, and that's where we start the plants for Mecklenburg County Park and Recreation. But the grind is not as fine as what you would use to start vegetable seeds. This is ideal for that because in seed germination, you need a moisture jacket, 360 degrees around the seed. And this mix does that because it's got enough moisture in it and it's fine enough to hold it and give it a quick germination. That and temperature will get you germination and sunlight with most vegetable seeds. There are few plant varieties that germinate in the dark. But now, when you're doing this process, now this is, what would you call this, a homeowner's model?
Homeowners,
All right. The commercial ones are, you got a circular steel handle, steel encasement here. It's injected into the mix itself, and the temperature is judged. Mecklenburg County holds all of their compost up north of 150 degrees. And that 150 degrees kills 99.9% of the bacteria. And then it's sent out and tested for its bacterial content, its pH content, and its nutritional value. It typically comes back as 1.5, 0.5, as opposed to 10, 10, 10, which is fertilizer that you buy in the stores. So it's fairly benign. Now this has been aged, so it's probably even lower than that. Now, the third horror story is another community garden composting bin that we had to tear down because it's falling apart. The last time I checked, the average shovel does not compost for about 1,500 years. The temperature never got to 150, so I used some of that leftover compost, and where I had planted cucumbers, I had the largest cucumber I had ever seen. It wasn't a cucumber. It was a watermelon. That seed had survived. So there's another example of improper composting. So it is discouraged because the art of composting is very closely akin to the art of gardening. And I hope I'm getting that point across. It's not just, as Granddad used to do, throw it over there in the corner. More finer, the shredder, the better. That's number one. Keep doing that. Now, if you have access, which is online now, the Master Gardener Manual, their composting chapter is way better than what it used to be. Debbie, you probably don't even remember that first copy. I don't think you were here then. But it's been significantly improved, and it's online and accessible via the NC State website, ncsuedu.edu.
Yeah, there's a good composting website on NC State. Our composting extension specialist retired last fall, and they've not hired a replacement yet, but her information is still there, and it's great.
Oh, yeah.
You just Google NC and composting, you can get it to pop up.
Now, the textbook that she's written, her name is Dr. Rhonda Sherman. It's the Worm Farmer's Handbook. And it's still in print. And there, Rhonda's whole operation, she had all these different devices. I think she had 27 different commercially available composted, backyard composting bin. But she also had one of the best commercial worm composting, vermicomposting programs I've seen. And that's where she would do international seminars there for the generation of vermicompost, as opposed to this. Now this is, and I'm going to digress for just a second on this. The temperature in this, to do it correctly, is above 150. That would kill all worms. What they do when the soil temperature gets to where it's uncomfortable, they burrow deeper. If it's soil that's friable, that's how they survive. A friend of mine set up the vermicomposting operation for Foster Cavitas. That is a wholesale vegetable purveyor here, Raleigh, Greensboro. There they have significant amount of waste, vegetables that go out of season, you know, that start to rot, aren't sold for whatever reason. So they took one of their tractor trailers with refrigeration and heating unit in it. We set up 4 bins, the black and yellow 27-gallon tubs that you get in any of the home centers, floor to ceiling, and all of the produce that would ordinarily go into the landfill went into that, with the entire group, all the bins filled with red wiggler worms. So as they would eat the defunct produce, they would be excreting out a viable fertilizer. Well, Roger, a friend of mine, gave me several bags of that we used to do a planting for Southern Spring Show. And there it was an edible landscape. So the ratio was like 25% vermicompost, the rest just a conventional potting soil. And that was some of the best plants that we'd ever done. But that all those enzymes that came through the gut of those worms created a viable, nutrient-rich seed starting medium, very successful. Now, I've started without that before because the whole problem doesn't work anymore. They shut it down. They actually had someone who didn't show up for work, and the heating and the cooling unit went out, so all the worms were killed. Now, in the real world, they would just burrow down, get colder, right? There, they didn't have that option, okay? Now, what they would do, we'd take them out, dump all the bins on a shaker table. It was an agitator table like you see in a mining operation or a gravel pit, but smaller. And it would shake the worms out, but all of the vermicompost would fall through. That was then desiccated and bagged and sold commercially. The worms were still alive. So they went back in to start the process all over again. Well, we had bigger stuff and a lot of it, avocados, apples, celery, lettuce, cabbage, all that went out of date. So I built a electrically powered shredder. Again, mo finer, the shredder, the better, okay? I took 10 7¼ inch circular saw blades and mounted them on a double shaft, powered it, motor here, and a big hopper. So all the stuff, we just dump all the produce in there and grind it up quicker so the worms could access it easier. Again, mo finer, the shredder, the better, right? All right, then that sped the process up dramatically. We had a problem with avocado pits. I changed the gearing, we got it right, but this was a prototype, right? Okay. Not everything works the first time, okay? When you have ballistic avocado pits coming out, and it didn't have all the safety features, it would never have passed OSHA. Like I said, it was a prototype, okay? I stayed away from it. And I said, yours. Now, those are 3 of the examples. I see it. All right, now, and I use this as a joke. You know, you were all born with moisture testers. I have very expensive equipment to test. Guess which one I use the most? Guess which one I carry with me all the time? Now, if you're left-handed, you can use this one. If you're right-handed, you can use this one. But it stays with you all the time. Whether it's in your pocket, whether it's scratching your neck, it's with you all the time, okay? Now, let's delve into, because this is what I'm going to do for the Culinary Guild, to gear this more towards the homeowner, you know, the smaller scale gardener, and what to do. All right. Let's say I have a head of celery that I've either grown or I've purchased at the grocery store. Okay. Well, I don't want to prep it. I'm going to dice it up, a julienne it, but I'm still going to have that stem left, right? Okay. 2 things. What have I just done? Mo finer, the shredder, the better. And then caught in this hopper, and it can go straight in to the compost bin. Or let's say I have carrots, celery, onions, a mirepoix, okay? I can cut off the stems of the carrot. I can peel the carrot. I can cut off the stem of the celery. If I don't want the leaves, I can add those. If I have onions, big onions, I don't want the stem. I don't want the outer shell. I can put all that in to a stock pot. And then I can salt it, season it, put water in it, turn up the heat. That is the beginning of a vegetable broth. Now you can add whatever vegetables you want in there. If you want kohlrabi, because it has a licorice flavor to it. It depends on what you're trying to achieve as a vegetable stock. But what I've done is I have converted waste into something usable that could be made into a stock or broth. It comes out as a stock. It can be made into a broth with addition of other ingredients. But I have softened up all that tissue. So if I put it in here, it's going to come out as a mush. And then that mush can go directly in to the browns and greens at the proper ratio. And if I'm doing this for real, if I'm going to plant anything edible like that, I'm going to mark it with a stick. Then I'm going to mark another one. Then I'm going to mark another one, mark another one. And then I know where it is so that when I turn, I have it pretty well balanced in this mixture here. Now, a lot of restaurants, the higher end restaurants, still do their own stocks. They'll do a fish stock, they'll do a vegetable stock, they'll do a meat stock, but they're more in the minority until you get into the higher end upscale restaurants. I don't know if they even teach that at Johnson and Wales, a culinary school here in Charlotte, and Central Piedmont teaches it. But it's a way to further reduce waste, because what you're doing is you're converting something that would ordinarily go straight in the landfill to something usable and speeding up the whole process. But you still keep the ratios the same. Okay?
Why do you have to mark it, and why couldn't you just mix it up?
Well, if you do, you're only going to get a little bit of it mixed. This way you get it all one layer, and then you mix it all at one time. That's so you have more uniformity. But as we've gone through this, you're seeing that composting is a little bit more complicated than my grandfather's technique, right? And unless you got a lot of land, and then you just throw it in. Now, there's another technique as well. It's called lasagna composting. It's a German, Hugel, I think is a German pronunciation. And there you dig a trench, and then your waste go in there, and then you have some of the dirt or the soil that you have taken out of that trench, and then you backfill into that. And you keep doing that, and you layer that lasagna here, the Hegel process in Germany. And there you are able to create a growing medium out of waste without putting chicken feathers in there, putting bone meal in there, putting blood meal in there. You're creating basically a garden bed out of what would ordinarily be thrown away. Clear? Okay. Now, I think I have covered. Now, there's one other step. Now, if I'm stockpiling browns, the leaves, keep them reasonably dry, but the bigger the pile, the less moisture permeates into it. If it's just left to sit there and soak, I was called on this. Someone asked me to identify a particular fungi. And I looked at it, I said, I've seen something like that before. But it came out of a dog. Its vernacular name is dog vomit fungi. And it literally looks like that, and it occurs in wet leaves. I've seen it in one community garden here in Mecklenburg County, and it really is a big yellow fungal spot about that size because of the wetness of the leaf pile that it was in. You ever seen that, Debbie?
Oh, yeah. It doesn't come out of a dog, but it is called dog vomit or cat vomit fungus. And it goes through color change. It can start out bright yellow and orange, and then it goes brown or white, and then brown and powdered. And then all that brown powder is all those fungal spores that then float on the air.
That's right.
Doesn't harm anything. It's just feeding on that organic matter that's there and breaking it down. If you don't like it, you can shovel it up, bag it up, and put it in the trash, or you can just go out there with a rake and rake it.
But identifying it wasn't all that difficult. There were pictures on the internet, so it was pretty quick to figure it out. I hadn't seen it in years, but that's just one example of creating an environment for an opportunistic fungi like that to set up, establish, and propagate. Just like you said, those spores in the wind are like magic. Okay. I think I have covered everything. Any questions? Yes, sir. Say that again.
Produce or garden greens that you suggest not put in?
If you have one that has
Repeat the question.
Oh, I'm sorry. The question was, are there any garden greens not to put in? The answer to that would be a little bit more complicated. If you have a disease plant, I typically have a torch. You know, do. Yeah, we went to the fire marshals, both in the county and city, to get permits to burn in some of the community gardens. But we could do it in the county, but we couldn't do it in the city. Guess where all the gardens were? In the city. Yeah, so that would be one way to do it. Well, not.
That kind of stuff.
It depends on how sophisticated your system is. But for this, no.
No, shell,
Yes,
but yeah, that's for the most part,
that's it. Yeah, that's right. Or if you have any that have a real disease, disease can be dealt with if you have your temperature above 150 degrees. The trick is, are you going to be able to hold it above 150? Now, the city has large tumblers, and one of the other composting operations I was involved with was at the Charlotte Municipal Airport, where they were trying to figure out a way to reduce the end product of the food service industry in the airport. So they had a tumbler, the height of this ceiling, actually a little taller than this, and the length of this building, turned and heated. I don't know if they used propane or if they used electricity, but they turned it to speed up the process. I don't think they ground anything. I think they just put everything in there. The friend of mine was the executive chef at the Washington Convention Center in DC. And there they had on-site composting of all of the different vendors that were in there. You got Wolfgang Puck, you've got Pizza Hut, McDonald's, you name it, they're in there. So the amount of food waste from that convention center, now this is 9 stories tall, 2 city blocks. So there's a lot of waste there. So they composted on site. And then after a certain point, it was hauled off to be finished other places. But the size of it and the space had been reduced. Also, they had fully compostable utensils, clamshells. All that could go directly into a composting situation in the way they did it. The pre-treatment and then off-site finish. Now, you can also use, to answer your question about horse manure, you can also use horse manure for petrochemical remediation, like for gas tanks that are taken out of old gas stations. There you take all that soil out and you mix it in with cow manure or horse manure, and that will remediate that out. That's not done in downtown Charlotte. That's not done in downtown Washington. It's done in a rural area, but it is a process that is by the EPA that can be used to remediate petroleum contaminated soil.
So you can also find lists of do's and don'ts to put the compost
Yes.
on in that Master Gardener, or let's call it NC State Extension Gardener handbook.
That's it.
And you can access it free online.
Mm-hmm.
And there's lists in that chapter on compost.
The new edition.
To do it.
Way better. Yes, ma'am. Sorry. Now, this is just one example. At Rhonda's test farm, and I think it's in Wake County. She's somewhere in one of those adjacent counties. This is just one that will allow you to aerate. You turn it, you tumble it, and each time you're tumbling, what I was doing with the silage fork here, it's doing it here just with the mechanical action. So it's turning, oxygenating, and mixing all in one turn of the screw. Okay? Yeah. Yeah.
I just have small scale composting. I have a garbage can with the bottom out, and I just throw everything in there. But I get these larvae,
Yeah.
worms.
Yeah.
And they eat everything. They eat it down.
Yeah. You're vermicomposting.
What you're doing is passive or cold composting, means you're not actively turning it, and it will still compost.
That's
It
right.
just takes it longer.
That's right.
I've been at my house for 9 years, and I have a composter being called an earth machine. It's about 3 foot tall and maybe 30 inches in diameter. I've been there 9 years and it's never gotten full. And I've put hundreds of corn cobs in there, corn shucks, tomato peelings, peach pips and peach peelings, you know, and it just takes time. You know.
They never get any nice dirt.
Oh, well, you need to get down in the bottom of your, should have some nice stuff down in the bottom.
And see, this takes because it's got a hatch that opens, so that it will. Now, this I think I got that one at Lowe's. I mean, I've got half a dozen of them, and they come in, you know, ones that you can pull out the bottom, ones that disassemble. The 3-bin composting system. I didn't finish this, but now this is something you can build this out of 7 pallets. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Inexpensive pallets, screwed together. And there, they've already got the slats in there, pre-assembled, that will allow sufficient airflow. But, like I said, when this one's finished, full, I then put it into here. I'm mixing and aerating into this one. Then I start the process over again. I fill this one, continue, and then, because again, I'm removing the front doors of each of these. As I fill this one for the second time, I incorporate it back into here, and it's broken down and decomposed. By the time I've done the 3rd fill on this one, number 2 is pretty close to full. So if it's pretty close to full, my next step is to remove everything from bin 2 and put it into bin 3. There, it's within just a few weeks of being ready like that. Then the process starts all over again. Now, this could be done out of 7 pallets, or it can be done more decorative out of concrete block. It depends on, you know, where you are. If you're an HOA, you've got all manner of hurdles to jump through to be able to do something, or jump over, excuse me, tunnels to crawl through to do something like that. The old joke that I've used before is a quote from Mark Twain. First, God made fools, and then he made school boards. And I added to that, and then he made HOAs. So now that you have seen my personal bias towards HOAs, from an agricultural standpoint, they are in the dark ages. But that's the technique that can be as decorative as you choose it. It can be camouflaged with shrubs. It can be with a trellis. You know, if you see these dumpsters at fast food joints, they have them all encased with some type of enclosure now. You know, A, to keep people from using them and putting stuff in, but also it's typically mandated by the building codes.
Now, talk about this. Is this not a batch composter? You do one batch at a time?
I typically do one batch at a time.
So you need to understand that. You fill it up and you turn it every few days until it's fully composted. If you keep adding stuff to it, you'll never really get finished compost. Correct?
Yep.
Well, does it smell? Will it smell?
It depends if you have your ratios incorrect. If you have a lot of greens in there and a lot of moisture, it's going to be festering. But if you do the right ratio, the 2 to 1, remember, again, that's where composting gets way more complicated than the average the average gardener.
But you can add, if you don't have leaves, you can use shredded paper.
Yep.
Because most of the ink that's used
Soy.
is soy.
Yep.
You can tear cardboard, you know, all these Amazon boxes, small pieces, just take the tape off. But some of those boxes have that paper tape that was on.
Yep. One thing that I've omitted in the Foster Cabinets thing, they had a cardboard shredder because most everything came in cardboard boxes. So rather than have that going in to be recycled, because that you can recycle that, they ground it up, and that was the bedding for the worms.
So you need to have that balance so it won't smell. You need to have that balance of your browns and your greens. And it's about 3 to 1, 3 parts brown to 1 part green. And so all your kitchen waste is considered green.
And that's usually all I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, for my garden. So I need to start throwing leaves.
But does it stink? No, it's probably fine.
Now, some municipalities have, there are half a dozen.
You can go online.
Yeah.
I went online, type pot grinder here, and it all says it's not available.
Really?
So
That'll
you're
be.
gonna have to search if you want to find one of those. But After it gets through, come up here and look at it, because it's got the little blades.
Now, the other thing you can do, if you don't have this, if you've got a blender, yeah, Vitamix, a wearing, anything like that, you know, you can go ahead and shred it there. And then if you have a lot, what I typically would recommend is that you freeze it until you have enough to make an entire layer, depending upon the size of your compost.
But starts that breakdown.
Speeds it up even more. Yep, because the cell, unless you flash freeze it, the ice crystals form and they shred the internal structure, especially with bell peppers. You know, that's one. Celery the same way because it breaks down that cell structure. Okay. Oh, you.
Compost file that we get, you know, it was just leaves, wasn't doing anything, and I was given access to spent grain from beer making. How did that? I mean, it turned it. It's like you ignited a fire.
Yeah.
But what was it with the grain? Was it the yeast or the heat or?
You got both. I'm sorry. It's got both. It's got sugars, number one, in it. It's got enzymes in it. Now, even though they've been effectively cooked out when you're making the malt or the mash, but again, you probably, as you mixed it in, you're oxygenating as well.
Spent grain from beer making.
Yeah.
Say that.
I'm sorry. The question was, he added spent malt from the beer making process. And there you have everything. You've got moisture, right? You have enzymes. You've got, once it's mixed in, you have increased the friability and the oxygenation of that innate, effectively neutralized pile. And you have brought it back to life with the mechanical process of the chemicals in it and the mixing. That's the mechanical process. So there you have reignited the fire. Even better. Even better. Did you have another one?
I mean, it depends on what's in there, I'm sure, but.
How long does it take to get to 150? I got the example that I gave earlier was about 10 days to where I could feel significant heat coming off. We let it stay there. I think we let it stay there a couple of months, but it just continued to cook down. I didn't have access to a thermometer at that time, so I don't know, but I know that the city of Charlotte keeps it above 150 for approximately 45 days. Now, it depends on what's in it and how fast it's, and how much they've ground it and how fast the process takes.
Pool in the center.
Yep.
And that's when they're turning it. And when they're turning it, they're bringing that undecomposed stuff from the outside to the center and it heats back up. So that's what he's talking about. They're keeping it heated up.
Now, the airport was doing it artificially. They actually had an external, well, it was an internal heat source, but the power generation came externally through this system that they had. But there they had a lot more to deal with, and it sped it up considerably. I was doing a class some years ago, and I'd gone through the whole process on the presentation, and the question was, well, do you do it yourself? And my answer was, I can't produce enough. I need it in dump truck loads. So I know how, but do I do it personally? No, I don't right now, because again, I can't produce as much as I need. So there I relied on the city, because they were bringing things in from everywhere. Now, one thing I was going to tell you, certain cities have these leaf vacuum trucks, and they can come in and vacuum the leaves, and there you have the segregation of the greens and the browns. We got plenty of browns coming up in the fall. We'll have less greens. So there you add other materials, and that's where the kitchen scraps can come in handy to take the place of. Yep.
Your coffee maker, you know, all these coffee shops, they'll give you a coffee grounds if you ask.
But you have to go get them.
They count as a grain.
Yep.
Very,
Yeah, that's fine too. That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions?
Are grass clippings and leaves, that I don't rake, so is that bad for your lawn?
What-
Yeah, I have giant oak trees and I get tons of leaves.
Mhm.
And when I cut, the grass, I have a lot of grass.
The question is, she has a lot of leaves coming down and it's interspersed with grass, which is rare. Usually you don't have grass growing in oaks, right? What you're doing with a lawnmower is mow final the shredder, and you're mixing at the same time. So what you've got is something that can go right straight into your compost bin because you've already done the bulk of the work of separating by running that mower over it. Well, I know you have it, you bag it. Well, they have them at Home Depot. I've seen them. Now, you had a question.
There's a lot of talk about environmental issues as a whole, like whether it's where we live here with overdevelopment or maybe just across the country.
So across the country, yeah.
Globe,
Yeah.
right?
Right?
And I see the age of everyone here in this room tonight. I don't know who's online, but the generation, my kids, are really concerned about the environment.
As they should be.
And so when you mentioned HOAs, and you said that you feel like they're antiquated, or maybe they're over.
No,
hardening or
they
whatever.
they do not do any horticultural research before they make their rules.
Stick with that. And then we talked, and then you're working for like a city that's doing like bigger things with its waste. But how do we as a society understand that some cities are doing it right, but we might not be allocating the resources across our country, or like, this is a big deal if we don't manage this. And so composting, it seems to be the future, but it takes a lot of resources and it takes money and taxation and bigger picture. How do we get?
Knowledge. Well,
Yeah, how do we like get there? Because I work for a school system,
Mhm.
right? And I don't see the composting, and I'm like, there's a lot of food waste.
Yeah.
And I heard you speak of that, but I don't know how we would get there just in our community to make a real difference than just our backyard garden. How do we, like, where do we go next?
All right.
Because other than it, depending on the industries as a whole.
all right, the question was the global impact, and I'm going to try and paraphrase this, the global impact of the lack of attention to the natural resource preservation. That fair, well, closely phrased? That is, from my time as a master gardener, it stunned me the lack of knowledge that's out there in the general public. Questions that, how do I plant this? Well, I learned that this high. But I've seen horticultural, agricultural knowledge skip, depending upon where you grew up, 5 generations, sometimes more than that. I actually did an event with some chefs. It was a planting. This one young chef who grew up in New York City, I think, he had no idea where tomatoes came from. For him, tomatoes came from Cisco in a box. So teaching him how to plant was something that I knew at 6 years old. He had never experienced it. His father didn't experience it. His grandfather didn't experience it. I don't think his great-grandfather experienced it, depending upon where you grew up and that lack of knowledge. We did one of our first gardens for the health department at Friendship Missionary Baptist Church. And it's one of the largest African-American churches, predominantly African-American churches in Mecklenburg County. They've got 10,000 members, 3 different services on Sunday. And when we had the preliminary meetings, I asked them, I said, how many of your parishioners are gardeners? And very few. How many of their parents were gardeners? Very few. So I said, one of the things that I'd like to see you do is query the membership for their agricultural knowledge. It may not be accurate, but find out what they know. Now, did they ever do that? I don't know. But getting those points across is something that the Extension Service tries to do, Master Gardeners have tried to do. When we do the 40, we've done the 47 gardens that we put in for the health department, I don't have time to teach them about horticulture and eco-science while we're doing those installations, because we hit the ground running and we've got to get them done quickly, because the volunteers disappear. When we serve them lunch, they're out the door. So I have refined our construction techniques, okay? So getting those points across. Now, what I do twice a year is for all the existing gardens that are in and the ones that we're going to do in the future, I do a how-to of what to plant when, fall and summer, and what the spring and fall. We just did the fall one a Saturday ago, not this past Saturday, week ago. And there it was successes, failures, things that didn't work for you, things that did work for you. Plant spacing, because that's one of the gaps. You know, they come in, they'll plant tomatoes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That is not going to work. You've got to have sufficient airflow. You've got to have the ability to take up nutrients. You've got to have the ability to get the roots established and be able to get in there and harvest. All right. So there is another, just one more example of the lack of knowledge, but correcting that, getting that information out is a challenge. Okay. I don't know that answers your question. I'm not by any means throwing cold water on it, but these are the challenges that we face in an agriculture, a less than active agricultural society. This place is becoming more urbanized every day. Now, certain schools, I think they've got some composting in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, but that's an outside contractor that comes in and the kids are taught what to put in what bin, and whether they do it, again, takes some follow-up from the teachers, some attention to detail on their part, but it's in its, I'm not going to say it's in its infancy, but it is very juvenile in terms of the institutionalization. Have I helped?
You have an online question?
We do? Okay.
For the backyard composter, can you put too much of one thing in? Example, coffee grounds that become detrimental.
You'd have to scale it up. Again, keep the ratios, stay cognizant of how much you're putting in, how much leaf, how much green material, and remember, coffee grounds count as green. So keep those ratios in mind. You said 3 to 1, I do 2 to 1. Yeah, so keep those ratios there. That way, if you have more, then you have to scale up the system. The ratios are pretty much locked. Is that clarified?
So yes, you can have too much brown for too much green, and it's not gonna compost if that ratio is not right, or it makes sense.
Okay, so this is not the online question, it's my question.
Oh, okay.
How do you, so when you say a ratio, do you do it by pounds? Do you do it by volume?
Volume.
Volume.
If you have one of those, I mean, you just throwing stuff in there.
Pretty much it. I mean, that is a totally different process than this type of composting here. Now, if you're, actually, it's not much bigger than this table. You know, I've drawn it, my drawing leaves a lot too big.
Each of those bins needs to be a minimum of 3 by 3 by 3.
That's right.
To get the heat in the center, to get that compost to heat up and really actively compost, you need it to be a minimum of 3 foot by 3 foot by 3 foot. And a lot of them that are 3 bin are more like 5 by 5 by 5.
Yeah.
So they are much larger scale than an individual single person living by themselves.
And again, if you have to do something more decorative around it, you keep the same same concept. It's got to have airflow. You can make it as decorative as necessary. And ideally, you make it with a porous cover where moisture can get in it, but critters can't.
Said I've heard this lesson over and over, but it's the first time I heard that green is chlorophyll and brown is carbon. Makes sense. Thank you.
It's actually nitrogen. Now, let me clarify something. What are you breathing right now? %78 nitrogen, right at 20% oxygen, and the rest is trace gases. Nitrogen exists as N2. It can't be separated to create straight nitrogen unless it goes through the Haber-Bosch process. And the Haber-Bosch process, Haber won the Nobel Prize in 1919 because he synthesized nitrogen out of the air through an electrochemical process. And Bosch chemicals, Haber-Bosch. But if you look it up, that's the process where artificially separated is nitrogen to create commercial fertilizer. And that sparked the green revolution, the beginning of it, that Norman Borlaug got so much credit for. But Haber was the chemist that came up with that process. Also known as the father of chemical warfare. He didn't work for us in World War I. He worked for the opposite team.
Any other questions? Now's your chance. If not, let's give Bill a big hand. I think.
Got one more. Got one more. I don't use magnolias because they're too waxy, you know. But oh, I'm sorry. Are there any leaves not to use? I don't use magnolias because they're too waxy. They don't break down as quickly, even if they are shredded more better. Okay, or more finer. Excuse me.
So the smaller the better, but if you have like sticks that are like little, you're trimming stuff and you have little sticks that are like maybe a quarter inch, you break those down?
I run them through the shredder.
Shredder.
Just take your hand from the.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Or chop. Either one.
Should you put weeds?
Repeat the question.
Should you put weeds in there? Only if you are certain that you're going to be above 150 degrees, because you want those seeds killed. You know, you're better to be more selective with what you put in if you cannot be assured of what your temperature is going to be. Now, I'm going to trim, if I'm trimming that tree out there, I can run it through the shredder and I've got greens and browns already there. But if I let it wait, I have less and less nitrogen in the greens because nitrogen gases off. If you look at the soil tests, they come back, they don't measure for nitrogen because it's too volatile a substance. It leaches off.
Such a thing as an affordable home shredder?
About $300.
Oh, and they're noisy, so.
Yeah, and no rings, no watches, no loose clothing, no scarves. We're not going to do an Isadora Duncan, right? Okay.
Thanks, Bill.
You're welcome.
Okay.